In 1187, the medieval world watched the Holy Land collapse into a storm of fire, ambition, and desperation. The balance of power had shifted, armies had risen and fallen, and the fate of Jerusalem rested between two men who had never planned to become enemies. On one side stood Salahuddin Ayyubi, commander of a unified Muslim coalition and the architect of a brilliant campaign. On the other was Balian of Ibelin, a noble unexpectedly thrust into command, defending a city with almost no soldiers left to fight. Their confrontation, tense, strategic, and surprisingly respectful, became one of the defining turning points of the Crusades. This is the complete war story, told from the first spark to the final negotiation. The story begins weeks after the catastrophic Battle of Hattin. The Crusader army had been crushed on a sun-scorched field near the Sea of Galilee. The survivors were scattered, captured, or fleeing toward the coast. Their losses went far beyond numbers. With the fall of their military leadership, every fortress and town in the region became vulnerable. Salahuddin's forces advanced rapidly. He understood the importance of momentum. Each victory weakened the Crusader Kingdom's ability to regroup. Cities surrendered in quick succession. Tyre held, but most of the interior crumbled within days. Inside Jerusalem, news traveled faster than refugees. Panic grew. Women, children, priests, and wounded soldiers crowded the markets and churches. Supplies were dwindling, walls were damaged, and the commanders left in the city had little experience leading large-scale defenses. Jerusalem had once been the Crusaders' proud capital. Now it was an undermanned, overcrowded relic trying to survive an unstoppable army. At this moment of chaos, Balian of Ibelin entered the story, not as a military savior, but as a man trying to save his family. Balian had been outside Jerusalem when the kingdom fell apart. His wife and children were trapped inside the city, so he asked Salahuddin for permission to enter and escort them out. Salahuddin agreed, granting him safe passage on the condition that he would not take up arms while inside. It was a reasonable agreement. No one expected a nobleman to fight alone. But Jerusalem citizens had other ideas. When Balian arrived, he found a city nearly leaderless. The patriarch, the remaining knights, and terrified locals begged him to stay. They knew that without someone capable of organizing a defense, the city would collapse in days, perhaps hours. Breaking an oath weighed heavily on Balian, but he faced a stark choice: honor his promise or allow thousands to be slaughtered. He sent word to Salahuddin, explaining the situation and declaring that he would remain. For many commanders of that era, this would have been considered betrayal. But Salahuddin, recognizing the circumstances, did not treat the decision as treachery. He even allowed Balian's family to leave unharmed. Two commanders, now preparing for war, had already shown each other a level of respect rarely seen in medieval conflicts. Jerusalem had been fortified for decades, but defenses alone could not save a city lacking soldiers. Most of the kingdom's knights had either died at Hattin or were held captive. Balian counted fewer than a dozen trained horsemen inside the walls. He began transforming civilians into fighters: blacksmiths, laborers, clerics, and teenagers. Old weapons were reforged. Church bells were melted into spearheads. The city had enough food for a short siege, but not months. Water sources inside the walls were limited. If Salahuddin chose to starve the city, resistance would not last long. Balian understood the psychological battle too. Fear could kill before swords ever reached the gates. So he delivered a speech, reminding the people of their duty to defend their homes, their families, and their faith. He did not promise victory. He promised dignity. Meanwhile, Salahuddin assembled an army with siege engines, archers, and infantry. His plan was methodical, designed to break the city's defenses without destroying the holy sites he intended to protect. The confrontation was now inevitable. On September 20th, 1187, Salahuddin's troops encircled Jerusalem. The sound of war drums echoed through valleys, warning the city that escape was no longer possible. Siege towers rolled into position, trebuchets were assembled, and archers lined the ridges. Salahuddin chose to attack the north wall, the same area through which the Crusaders had stormed the city nearly 90 years earlier. It was historically symbolic and tactically sound. The ground was flatter, allowing siege engines to move easily. The first volleys shook the city. Stones crashed into towers, dust filled the air, and the defenders scrambled to repair breaches. Balian personally led counterattacks, rallying inexperienced fighters with calm authority. Despite limited manpower, the defenders held the line longer than Salahuddin expected. The Muslim army intensified artillery fire. Siege towers approached the walls under shields and wet hides to prevent burning. Arrows darkened the sky. Hours turned into days. The city's defenses cracked inch by inch. Inside Jerusalem, exhaustion spread. Supplies dwindled faster than predicted. Every night, the defenders carried rubble, repaired walls, and tended to the wounded. Sleep lasted minutes, not hours. Yet the defenders refused to surrender. By late September, Salahuddin's engineers discovered a weakness on the northeast corner of the wall, near a gate rarely used in battle. They concentrated their engines on the spot, bombarding it relentlessly. The wall shook, bending under pressure like an old shield in a duel. On September 29th, a significant breach appeared. Salahuddin's troops surged forward, attempting to storm the gap. The defenders responded with everything they had: boiling oil, stones, arrows, and desperate charges. Balian himself led the counterassault. Contemporary accounts describe him fighting in full armor, surrounded by men who trusted him completely. The breach became a whirlpool of chaos, screams, dust, metal, and smoke blending into a scene that seemed to last forever. Although the defenders pushed the attackers back, the cost was devastating. Many of their strongest fighters were lost. The wall could not withstand another major assault. The people knew it. Balian knew it. And Salahuddin certainly knew it. At this point, the question was no longer whether Jerusalem would fall, but how. Realizing the city's collapse was inevitable, Balian sought an audience with Salahuddin. Negotiation was not a sign of weakness, it was a strategy to save the civilians inside. The two men met between the lines, surrounded by guards but speaking with a tone of mutual respect. Balian presented the reality. Jerusalem could not resist much longer, but surrender without terms would risk massacre. To strengthen his bargaining position, he made a bold threat. If Salahuddin refused a negotiated settlement, he would order the destruction of key sites in the city and lead a final, suicidal defense that would cost thousands of lives on both sides. It was a calculated risk. Balian had no desire to harm the city, but he needed Salahuddin to understand the desperation inside the walls. Salahuddin listened carefully. He was committed to taking Jerusalem, but he preferred a bloodless victory. Destroying the city or losing countless troops was unnecessary and contrary to his principles. Negotiations continued through messengers and short meetings. Both leaders understood the stakes. Both recognized each other's authority and resolve. Ultimately, a path forward emerged. The agreement reached between Salahuddin and Balian was unprecedented for its time, especially for a city that held such immense symbolic value. The terms allowed civilians to leave peacefully after paying a set ransom. The amount was standard and affordable for most families. Those without means were not abandoned. Wealthier residents paid for strangers. Religious leaders collected donations. Even some of Salahuddin's officers contributed to free captives. Despite these efforts, thousands remained unable to pay. Salahuddin made a historic decision. He freed many of them at his own expense, giving them safe passage to Christian-held territories. Churches were not destroyed. Pilgrims were not harmed. Religious ceremonies were allowed to continue. Holy sites, including the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, remained protected. On October 2, 1187, after nearly 2 weeks of negotiations, Jerusalem surrendered. Muslim soldiers entered with discipline. No chaos, no burning, no loot. The city changed hands not through slaughter, but through careful diplomacy and resolve. For Balian, the surrender was a bittersweet moment. He had done everything possible to protect the civilians under his command. Though the city was lost, the people survived. That was his victory. After the entry of Salahuddin's forces, Balian left Jerusalem with the remaining citizens and clergy. He did not escape under shame or punishment. He walked out with respect from the very commander who had defeated him. Salahuddin treated him not as a defeated rival, but as a worthy opponent who fought with courage and negotiated with honesty. Their clash had produced no hatred, only professional recognition. As Balian departed, he glanced back at the walls he had defended relentlessly. The city was lost, but not destroyed. Its people were alive, its sacred places untouched. In an era defined by merciless warfare, this outcome stood apart. Salahuddin's men repaired structures, restored order, and reopened mosques that had been converted decades earlier. The city's new chapter began immediately, without revenge. The confrontation between these two commanders became one of the most respected exchanges of the Crusades. The war was fierce, but it did not erase honor. The fall of Jerusalem triggered waves of shock across Europe. Kings, knights, and clergy called for a new crusade. The Third Crusade soon followed, reshaping the politics of the region yet again. But the encounter between Salahuddin and Balian remained unforgettable. Balian continued serving as a negotiator during later conflicts, leveraging the credibility he gained from defending Jerusalem with integrity. Salahuddin, whose legend grew after the city's peaceful capture, maintained his reputation as a disciplined and principled commander. The surrender of Jerusalem in 1187 stands out because it avoided the widespread bloodshed common in medieval warfare. Historians credit both men for this outcome. Salahuddin for his restraint and Balian for his courageous negotiation. Their confrontation proved that warfare, even at its peak, could still be shaped by conscience. The clash between Salahuddin Ayyubi and Balian of Ibelin was not simply about armies and walls. It was a contest of strategies, wills, and philosophies. It produced neither humiliation nor cruelty, but a rare moment where leadership rose above rage. Salahuddin reclaimed Jerusalem with discipline. Balian defended it with integrity. Both men, standing on opposing sides of faith and armies, showed the world that honor could survive even the harshest sieges. Their story remains a powerful reminder. True strength is not only in victory, but in how victory is earned.